Dead Poet Society. For this Module 3 essay, I wanted to take a different approach and actually do the video essay, talking about the first prompt, which focuses on the myth of meritocracy and how it connects to the elite high school film genre. I personally decided to rewatch The Dead Poet Society because it interests me a lot, because I really do like watching films that kind of go against what Bowman classifies as what makes the genre of the film. The Dead Poet Society was a bit different than School Ties or whatever other elite high school films that there were. Let's get into it. So to make it official, the prompt that I'm going to be addressing is, what is the meritocracy myth? Elite or urban high school movies teach the meritocracy myth, and then kind of that so what question, and try to expand upon it in kind of a not philosophical way, but just to make it kind of, oh, like there's a reason for why I'm doing this. So, meritocracy myth. Self-explanatory, actually. If you don't know what meritocracy is basically an ideology, or how we're applying it in this class is the ideology that our society is built up upon merit, and that successes that people get are because they have good merit, and that the way that we measure success, and the way that we should measure success, and the way that we are able to achieve success and grow, obviously in a capitalist society, that means being wealthy and being rich, really. I don't believe in that. I don't think many people believe in that. This film is quite interesting because I think, if anything, it challenged meritocracy in its entirety. Haven't seen Dead Poet Society. I'll give a little kind of rundown through it, and while I'm running through the plot of the film, I want to interject with some clips as well as some other things to kind of build upon meritocracy, and then I actually want to get into the big picture about how this film challenges it in its entirety, and really what makes this film what I believe is a perfect juxtaposition to the elite high school film, and how it takes every aspect of the elite high school film and does it in such a profound way that just makes it so, one, enjoyable just to watch, and then as we dive deeper into it, it's just like, wow. Robert Bowman made a textbook slash research, whatever the heck you'd call it. Hollywood Goes to High School talks about how a lot of the high school films that we see in today's society fit into three subcategories: urban, suburban, and elite. Today we're focusing on elite. You can kind of generalize what it means. Prestigious universities, prestigious schools, focuses on students, a lot of academic struggles, a lot of academic success. It focuses a lot on mental struggles and, not really students versus like main antagonists. Usually the antagonist is more of a societal, or it's like an institutionalized thing. It's kind of hard to generalize it in that sense. Opening scene, we see it already. The school is being like, we're the top in the nation. We get into Harvard. Everyone here goes into Harvard. We see people applauding for this success. I mean, I would be really happy to go to an institution that could basically grant me into an Ivy League school. I'd love that. I'd love to be that intelligent. I'd love to be able to go to an Ivy League school. However, I'm not able to. But we're introduced to our, I guess, quote-unquote protagonist. It's super difficult for me to assign a protagonist role to any of these characters because there are three main protagonists. It's kind of difficult to choose which protagonist, or which protagonist I want to center on, because there are kind of three: Mr. Keating, Todd, and Niel. Those are the big main three, and a lot of the boys in this film, I think there's around 7 of them in total, kind of the main group that we see, are all amazing, except for one who we hate. Focus on Todd first. See, this is the character we're introduced to in the beginning, so we're going to assume that we assume he's the protagonist. Super early on, I think at timestamp 5:30 and 7:20, we can already see how it's shy, a little bit reserved, and is living kind of in the shadows of his brother, who we find out a little bit later on is the valedictorian of this institution.
Hey, I hear we're gonna be roommates. I'm Neil Perry.
I'm Todd Anderson.
Why'd you leave Ballincrest?
My brother went here.
Oh, so you're that Henderson.
you can already tell, kind of living in the shadow really doesn't do well for him. He really doesn't like it at all. I love that this film really lays out everything super early on, so I'm able to kind of like give y'all the groundwork to establish everything. We see Meritocracy challenge early on extremely. These kids love their extracurriculars, and Niel is the first person that we kind of get a glimpse into of his parents, quote unquote, authoritarian figures, not being a big fan of it. They challenge it, they're not the biggest fans of it. They think that he should be focusing, especially his father, focusing on his education and not what he wants to do.
Niel, I've just spoken to Mr. Nolan. I think that you're taking too many extracurricular activities this semester, and I've decided that you should drop the school annual.
But I'm the assistant editor this year.
Well, I'm sorry, Niel.
But, Father, I can't. It wouldn't be fair.
Fellas, would you excuse us for a moment?
Meritocracy in the situation is kind of conforming. A big thing that I have a criticism of Bowman is how much in the textbook he talks about this film reflecting an urban high school film when, if anything, it is basically a suburban high school film. It is about individualism. These students need to find their thing. You know, we don't see too much early on. However, it kind of progressively grows throughout the film. We see kind of the catalyst, Mr. Keating, for individuality, starting a new path. A word that I think really does define it, which I'll go into a lot more detail throughout this essay, is existentialism. Existentialism, I had to write it down, is a philosophical approach or theory in which an emphasis is placed on the existence of an individual, or that an individual should be free and a responsible agent in determining their own development is through acts of their own will. We see really early on that these people have none of these qualities. Their parents are pushing them into this school. They are doing whatever they're told, whether it is to drop their extracurriculars and to start being more academic, where the central theme is introduced. I guess the biggest theme, Carpe Diem, seize the day. That is a recurring phrase that we see throughout this entire film whenever these boys do something that would be not liked by their authoritarian figures, that is very weird, that's different. Anything that's different is, in their minds, Carpe Diem, seize the day. Just do it because you want to. Kind of do the thing that they've always wanted to do because their parental or teacher figures have always been like, no, you need to do this, and that. So we see this a little bit in the beginning. And we're obviously introduced to another one of our protagonists, Mr. Keating. Early on is 11 minutes and 45 seconds. This guy's completely different. And the movie does a very good job at setting up Mr. Keating as a character. We see the other teachers who are boring. They're, lecture heavy. You can't miss a single class. You can't miss a single assignment, blah, 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 blah. And then we have Mr. Keating, who walks in, whistles, looks through everything, and walks out. And everyone is astonished by this, obviously. These people are 17 years old. We can assume that they've been in this institution for a pretty long time. They've never seen anybody like this before. They've never seen an authoritarian figure do this and treat them like this. It's a huge shock to them. Keating is treating them differently. This rigid structure that they've been used to their entire lives is now being disrupted because they're being treated like people. A quote that I really do like that Mr. Keating says right off the bat, they believed that they were destined for great things, which I think is a really important quote because that's what all of these kids are being kind of set up to do. They are being told that if you do this, and this, you will make it to Yale, you will make it to Harvard, you will make it to Dartmouth, and you will become a lawyer, you will become a doctor, you will become this, you'll become that. These kids are being spoon-fed an Ivy League education, basically. However, we find out that maybe that's not the path that a lot of these people want to take. And we can see through a lot of the media that we've explored in the class is that when you're not a white male who goes to these private institutions, you aren't really bed into the Ivy Leagues as easy as these kids are. And as much as I would like to expand upon the topic of racism, there is not a single person of color in this film at all. I just kind of want to put it out there that these individuals are privileged. Each and every single one of them is just something I want you all to keep in mind. That these people are being given this opportunity to go to Ivy League schools. That's not something that a lot of people get to do. That really kind of differentiates Mr. Keating from everyone else is when they rip out the introduction of the poetry book. This makes a lot more sense later on in the film. It's a little bit weird in the beginning of the film, but there is a real importance for this. And the biggest thing is that one of the biggest life mottos that Mr. Keating tries to put onto these kids is the rejection of conformity and understanding that you as a person are allowed to believe in your own things and that they have value, and that you shouldn't be reading a textbook of what someone else is saying and take it as the gospel, that this is the only way to judge poetry, this is the only way to read poetry, this is the only way to understand poetry. Poetry is what you make of it. So how does this connect to meritocracy? It's because meritocracy, in this sense, doesn't exist. These students, if they continue on the path that they're going on, which is to conform to authority, to go to these Ivy League schools, graduate and become what their parents want for them, that's them conforming. That is them just taking in meritocracy, abusing their privilege, and not leaving the institution as a better place than it once was. A big argument that Bowman makes in his textbook is that when these protagonist characters, typically middle class protagonists who get this opportunity, get this privilege to climb the social ladder by being allowed into these institutions, is that they leave it as a better place than it once was. Quote is, "I will teach you to think for yourselves again," implying that kids do not think for themselves whatsoever. I mean, we can see it in the first 20 minutes of the film. They do whatever they're told by an authoritarian figure, typically a teacher, a parental figure, whatever, to kind of get the introduction of our characters. I want to briefly go over each character just a little bit so that you kind of have the basis for when I start dropping names and you kind of know what these characters are, because the personalities that all these boys have are extremely unique, which I think is why this film is probably one of the better elite high school films, because it adds so much more depth to each individual character instead of just creating the protagonist, an antagonist, and then one side character that kind of builds up from nothing. We have 6 characters here plus a teacher that have so much depth to them. The teacher antagonist plus the parental antagonist. So I want to go through each of these characters just a little bit. But we have Todd, main protagonist, we're assuming at this rate. We see Todd is very secluded. He doesn't like reading aloud in class. He's very unconfident in himself. But even despite all of this, the biggest that really kind of was jogging my brain a little bit was, despite how weird or, weak he would be viewed in any other film, is completely different in this film. And the group of friends that he's in are completely different. They're adaptive, they're accepting of him. We will adapt what we do just so you can come and hang out with us. These are such loving people. The second you Google this film on YouTube, it is all about, homosexual tendencies and stuff like that. And that's something for a completely different video. But it is an extremely important point to point out, is that after watching School Ties and seeing the way that these boys treat Todd is insane. And even after watching a lot of suburban, a lot of urban high school films, this is like a very interesting approach to character development, and seeing how adaptive and accepting that these people are of Todd is just amazing. Why I bring this up is, not only does this build more character depth to everybody, it also makes the friendships feel more real and less superficial. We're watching a film with actors in it. If an actor is able to perform so well, and if a screenwriter and a script is able to make us feel so connected to people, this doesn't look like 2 actors acting. This looks like 2 longtime friends being with each other. The biggest guy is Niel, other protagonist. He is eccentric, he's optimistic, he's kind of the glue of the group, I think. Like, actually the glue of the group initially. I think this changes a lot. We'll get to that, unfortunately. He has a nagging father. He's the one who we have the most parental depth to. Like, we see his parents a lot, and they play a big role in this film. They're against almost everything that he's doing, which sucks, because he's a really talented person who should be allowed to do what he wants, because he keeps straight A's in a very hard school, might I add, and he just wants to act. Like, he just wants to be himself. Some few side characters. We have Meeks, who is kind of like our nerd character. He's the smartest of the group. He doesn't get too much character depth, But it really is interesting to see, as much as he would be the stereotypical nerd who gets bullied a lot, who they just use him for answers, as much as they use Meek for help, they also include him in almost every activity that they do. A lot of the times we see, the nerd characters really pushed aside and ostracized when it comes to anything except education. But I mean, with the Dead Poets Society, they allow him to come and they interact with him sometimes in just normal ways and not bullying him 24/7. Charlie, one of my favorites. So Charlie is our cocky man of the group, I guess. Studly like. I don't know. I think he does play a sport in a club, I'm assuming. Kind of a semi-bully. He's always either drinking or smoking a cigarette. He's the guy who's laid back. He's the one who takes initiative and does very bad decision making, but just does it because carpe diem. He can do what he wants. This is why the character depth is so important to the side characters. Charlie, who we assume is this hard shell guy, stone face, who does everything. He really does change towards the Knox. This is kind of the romantic element of this movie between Knox and Charlie. So Knox has a crush on this girl. There's a little bit of the scene. It's not too important, but I do want to just say it because of the plot. Chris invites him to this party, and he's super intoxicated, and he ends up kissing her, and one of the frat boys sees him, and Chris's boyfriend beats him up, basically. And at this point, we're like, what the heck is going on here? So, despite all of this, we would expect that she's in love with somebody else, he'd give up on it. But he is infatuated with this woman, and he will not let her go. A really important scene with Mr. Keating is around the 43-minute mark, where he stands upon a desk and says, "This is how I'm viewing the world from a different angle." And while the students are going up and trying this out, there's a quote that really stuck with me. "The longer you wait to find your voice, the weaker it will become." Referring back to the fact that these students have no voice at all because of conformity. Extremely important part, or plot point, I guess, is a bell rings. He leaves the class and tells the students, "Hey, I'm going to assign you a poem. I want you to write a poem and perform it in class." And he specifically points out Todd as this being his worst fear ever. Approach possibly the most important scene of this entire film, 47-45. Todd and Niel. Niel has just proclaimed that he wants to try out for this play, while we see Todd struggling to write a poem. We see that he's been going through a lot of different stuff. We see him and Niel get in a little bit of a quarrel over Todd doubting him about his ability to perform in a play when his father does not want him to do it at all, and Todd just not doing anything.
Oh, being in the club means being stirred up, I think. You look about as stirred up as a cesspool.
So, you want me out?
No, I want you in. But being in means you gotta do something, not just say you're in.
Listen, Neil, I appreciate this concern, but I'm not like you, all right? You say things and people listen. I'm not like that.
Don't you think you could be?
No, I don't know, but that's not the point. The point is that there's nothing you can do about it, so you can just butt out. I can take care of myself just fine, all right?
No.
I mean, no.
No.
Niel wants him in the Dead Poets Society. There's an exchange between the two where Todd, "Well, you just want me out?" And then Niel's like, "No, I want you in. I want you to be a part of this. I want you to have a voice." Important scene is when Mr. Keating forces Todd to recite a poem just out of the blue. We see him kind of force him up on the stage, really against his comfort zone, and almost humiliate himself in front of everything. But Mr. Keating is very keen on this, that he needs to do this, and that he should not listen to those people. You need to speak your mind. He puts his hands over his eyes and he tells him just to speak. Say what you want. Look, the first thing that comes to mind, the more thought that you put into this, the harder it's going to be for you. You need to just go. Whatever comes to your mind, just say it. Whatever you want to do, just do it. And what we get is probably the most profound poem that is recited in this entire film. And the boys clap for him. They stand and they clap for him because it was really good.
This image floats beside me.
Sweaty-toothed madman.
The sweaty-toothed madman with a stare that pounds my brain.
Oh, that's excellent. Now give him action. Make him do something.
His hands reach out and choke me.
That's it. Wonderful, wonderful.
And all the time he's mumbling.
What's he mumbling?
Mumbling truth.
Yeah.
Truth like a blanket that always leaves your feet cold.
Forget them. Stay with the blanket. Tell me about that blanket.
You push it, stretch it, it'll never be enough. You kick at it, beat it, it'll never cover any of us. From the moment we enter crying to the moment we leave dying, it'll just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream.
This is the first time I can say, I'm pretty sure, that Todd has ever been told that he is worth something, that he has a talent. It's the first time I think people have sat down and said, you are good. It is reassurance, it's stability, it's everything. Him being shown, him being told that you are good while he's grown up in the shadows of his brother is huge. His parents show no value, show no interest in anything beyond traditional school expectations. 1 hour and 4 minutes and 45 seconds, we get the center of gravity quote that I'm pretty sure I'm just going to stick with up until this point. We all have a need for acceptance, but remember, your beliefs are unique and your own. Now that ties back to what I was saying initially, where the film focuses a lot on the importance of nonconformity, and that you need to understand that you are a valuable individual and your opinions are worth something. They're unique. You need to be able to fight back and stand for what you believe in. That's a huge part of this film. That's the entirety of this film, is to challenge conformity. It's to challenge the elite high school setting in its entirety. 1 hour and 19 minutes, we see a quarrel, not really a quarrel, but a interaction between Mr. Keating and the headmaster of the school, where they both have very different opinions on tradition and conformity. How Mr. Keating is like, well, tradition isn't good. There is a danger to conformity, and the headmaster just doesn't care. Apart for the play, he's been going to this thing, practicing for it, and it's the night before the show, and Niel's father is in his dorm room, and he has found out about the play that Niel is in. Line that I guess would kind of place Niel in the lower middle class area is, I have made many sacrifices to get you here. And Niel saying, I know I'm not as rich as Charlie, but I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to the school, you're paying for it, you aren't poor, really working middle class, so I really think it's difficult to kind of place him into that. That's just a side note that I wanted to make. I feel that the reason this quote exists is not to, give some background context about their socioeconomic status. I believe that this is a crack in Niel's father. It shows us that Niel's father is trying to live through Niel because Niel is given better opportunities than he had when he was younger. So that's why he's making choices for him rather than letting him live his life. Side note that I want to implement in here is the decision that Niel makes to forge a letter or to give confirmation that his parents do consent to him doing this. I haven't talked about it, but I'll just quickly bring it up here. I actually realized that while previously making this, I didn't think it was too important, but actually I do realize in conjunction with individualism how much of a flaw that their individuality can be this early on in the film, because it hasn't really had time to manifest into what it is at the end of the film. When Niel makes this decision to type on the typewriter, I, Niel's father, blah, 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 consent to whatever the afformed, you know what I'm talking about. This is extremely early on. This is Mr. Keating being like, you need to do this. And this is the first time these boys have ever heard someone say anything like this. So they're hyper, they're jumping on it. The second they can do carpe diem, the second they can reject authority, the second they could do anything, no matter how stupid of an idea it is, they just do it. And that's why it's such a big flaw in these people, is because they are young. They don't understand their own individuality yet. Just because someone kind of opens the doors to you and says that you have a right to your own opinion, you can do what you want, doesn't mean that the second you're given this opportunity, the second you're given this knowledge, that you are going to understand it and utilize it in the best possible way right off the bat. That's why this scene exists, is because Niel is hyper on the fact that, oh my God, I'm going to do this. Why not? Literally, why not? And that's kind of, unfortunately, the flaw I find in Mr. Keating and these boys. They don't really pace it at all. They're just jumping to the fact that they can do what they want now. His father is like, you need to drop out of this play. This is no me gusta. We're like, dude, come on, fight back on your father. Obviously, that's what we're rooting for, and that's what he wants to do, but he's scared of his father. Despite everything that Mr. Keating has taught him, his father is still his father. Before the play gets presented, where Niel visits Mr. Keating, and Mr. Keating urges him, you need to call your father, you need to tell him that this is what you want to do. Niel talks to his father. We say this is a verbal confirmation. I am still very hesitant to see if this is real or not, but I'm assuming it is. And as the play is done out, we see this beautiful performance. We see the life in his face. That is a huge thing that I gotta give credit. Robert Sean Leonard, slay. It's huge credit that I gotta give him for, because he is able to, the emotion in his face in that scene is amazing. The happiness, everything, the life. His friends are so ecstatic for him. They're clapping. It's a standing ovation at the end when he's pushed to the front. It is a beautiful scene, and we see his father stand there with the darkest face ever. And at the end of the play, he wants to talk to him. Niel get pushed through all his friends. They're trying to congratulate him, go out to dinner with him, get drinks, and his father is dragging him through and pushes him into the car. Another important interaction happens between Niel and Mr. Keating. While Niel is getting pulled away by his father, Mr. Keating goes, Niel, you have the gift. What a performance. You even left me speechless. And Niel's father rips him away from Mr. Keating and says, stay away from him. And in shock, we all are like, oh my God. He gets in the car and they leave. House, we're with Niel, his mother, and his father, and two very important quotes come in here. You're going to Harvard. You're going to be a doctor. You got opportunities that I could never imagine. There's a lot of gaslighting going on in this scene because Niel doesn't want to be a doctor. I don't hear him ever say he doesn't want to go to Harvard, but he has other things that he wants to pursue. And a quote that I probably should have said in the beginning of this thing was that Niel's father does not care at all what he does once he graduates. He is going to graduate, so why does he care about it regardless? Midsummer-like thing. It's cold, it's dark. We see Niel take off his shirt and put the crown back on his head, and he walks around. It's a very weird scene. There isn't a lot of tension building, but you have the feeling that something is off. Walking through the house, we're getting looks at the family, and then we see Niel pull out a key, unlock something, and take it out of a drawer, and we see the tip of a handgun. And then, without any shooting sound, all we get is Niel's father waking up. He goes downstairs after he couldn't find Niel in his bedroom, and Niel has killed himself with his father's handgun. This decision, as heartbreaking as it is, the failure of meritocracy is really always seen as in they didn't make it into a university, or they didn't really pursue what they thought they were going to do. This film blows that out of the water. The podcast that we listen to, 3 Miles, we see two students, Melanie and Jonathan. They aren't able to achieve what they were kind of destined to do or just hoped to do. We have the guy who got a scholarship, a full ride to a university, and he dropped out. He didn't go to a single class and he got expelled.
The way I found out that I failed out of Wheaton was by going back to the school, and my roommate opened the door and he was like, yeah, man, they changed the lock, and the dean was like, you need to leave immediately. You cannot be on this campus. You need to leave immediately.
And Melanie, who was so mortified that she didn't get the scholarship, that she just got her GED and dipped.
She graduated early and checked out of high school. And she's furious at herself for doing that.
I accepted it, basically. And I guess I just grew very angry with myself for making that choice of saying, well, I'm going to accept this instead of fighting against it. That's always in the back of my head. Like, I know I fucked that up because I could have probably gotten something out of that extra year of school.
That is what we kind of assume. And it's really somber to see that these two who really deserve greatness weren't able to get it. But Niel completely blows that out of the water. The failure, the failure due to his father telling him that he is going to get taken out of the school, that he is going to be enlisted in the military, and that he is not going to be allowed to do anything, and he is going to be a doctor who attends Harvard University. Niel is like, this is it. I have nothing else I can do at this point. Suicide, unfortunately, is the only option. There's nothing he can do at this point to get to his father. Meritocracy at this rate has completely taken over him and over his family. There's nothing he can do. He's at a loss. That's why he kills himself, because there is not a single thing that he would rather do than not have to do this. Here we see his parents grieving over his body. We have a jump cut to Todd sleeping and Charlie trying to wake him up. This is why Charlie is my favorite character, I think, period, in this entire thing. Charlie, our stud, who basically was trolling the heck out of the school, yada, 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 is sitting in front of Todd, bawling his eyes out. Literally bawling. Like, he is literally holding on to him, like twitching, crying, saying, Niel is dead. Everyone else is standing there, mortified. Oh, I probably should have given context to this. So, his parents just straight up blame Mr. Keating. Mr. Keating is the reason that their son killed himself. Richard Cameron, the redhead kid, says this kind of important quote, so I wanted to input it here. You can't save Keating, but you can save yourself. So, who basically rats the entire group out. The Dead Poets Society, Mr. Keating, everything. The staff is aware of everything that they've done, which our eyes is, okay, they are in a club, like, huh? Who cares? I love, absolutely love Charlie. He literally punches him and gets expelled. Straight up. Charlie. The students are then basically forced into confessing, because if they don't, either they will face expulsion from the university, and we even see a scene where Todd's parents are once again telling him what to do, sign the paper, confess, get this guy fired. Boys basically confess. We see them all back in the classroom, and at this point, Mr. Keating walks in. The teacher, or I think, if I'm not mistaken, it is actually the headmaster, whatever, is trying to get them back into the introduction, but they've all ripped that part out of their books. So they're all standing there kind of like, what do we do? And as Mr. Keating leaves, Todd takes the initiative, stands up on his desk, and goes, "Oh, Captain, my Captain."
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Sit down, Mr. Anderson. You hear me? Sit down.
So, at this point in time, he has now taken the initiative, going against meritocracy, going against the headmaster, everything. This is a huge part. This is a huge scene right here. And not only does Todd stand up, so does Meeks, so does Pitts, so does Knox, so does a few other minor characters. They all stand up, say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and just stand there. Film ends with Mr. Keating saying, "Thank you, boys," as it zooms in on Todd's face, and the movie concludes. To sum up what this movie talks about is actually extremely similar to The Great Gatsby. That the film talks about the moral bankruptcy of America, the moral bankruptcy of the meritocracy system, the moral bankruptcy of conformity. This is a representation of the chokehold of meritocracy on this society. The school's definition of it is the idea that anything different is only bad. Mr. Keating gave these students an outlet to look at the world differently than they would ever have been taught to, and gave them the opportunity to make it their own. The Dead Poets Society is a direct juxtaposition to meritocracy. These boys see the danger and are taught the danger of conformity, which in this case is meritocracy. Meritocracy at the school is discipline, forcing these boys to listen to authority, and so on. Some of these students have achieved a lot, but not in the eyes of the institution. We see at the end of the film that these students reject it. Something that is very common in suburban films, we see here in an elite film, which is very different and unexpected. I want to highlight a very key point in this film. I think that represents the toxicity of meritocracy, and that being after Niel dies, we get to see the true colors of this institution and conformity as a whole. The reason Niel kills himself is his father. That is not up for debate. That is fact. We know that is fact. We know that in that moment, Niel has lost all hope because his father is pulling him out of school and sending him to military school. However, despite all of this, the school, Niel's parents, and even a lot of the students blame Mr. Keating and the Dead Poets Society. This is a disgusting representation of how selfish and conceited humans can be. That you could drive your own son to suicide and still blame someone else and find a way to think that you are a victim of something. Ideology that has been embedded in these kids throughout their entire lives, that they need to conform to authority and go to Ivy League schools and focus on their education, is what turns out to be their downfall, and in this case, Niel's downfall. It wasn't Mr. Keating's fault that Niel killed himself. What Mr. Keating did was give these students a reality check that you are a person. You should be doing what you want to do. You shouldn't be doing what your parents want you to do. The boys finally understand this concept and start to pursue what their interest is, which in this case is the Dead Poets Society. When Charlie tries to say that women should be allowed at this institution, and when Niel pursues his acting career, we really get to see how malicious the system can be when you decide to go against it. This system that throughout the entirety of these boys' lives has been saying to them that we are the correct path, we are the road to the Ivy League schools, we are your protection, we are your safety, is blaming a teacher on the suicide of another person when it is that institution's and Niel's father's fault. I mean, you see it blank stare, like, oh my God, this is the true colors of this. Bowman states in chapter 6 that elite films focus upon the burden of academic achievement. We see this in School Ties when What's-His-Face has an anxiety attack after he is humiliated in his French class. And we could probably see this in a lot of other films. I haven't watched too many, but I'm assuming this is a common theme. In this film, academics, if anything, aren't the main drive. The film centers on carpe diem, the negatives or the problems with conformity, valuing your opinions, and understanding your self-worth. Walks out of that classroom for the last time, and as we see Todd's face, our once shy person who wouldn't even stand up in front of the class or even read in class is now starting and defying. But even then, is the school left a better place? Arguments that Bowman makes for a lot of these films is our quote-unquote protagonist from a middle-income area who has seen the different side of things, comes into the school and changes it for the better. This individual isn't really that person. Despite how shy he is and despite how much he struggles, he isn't not destined to get to these schools. Despite living in the shadows of his brother, he's still attending this institution regardless. Or, I mean, I could even argue that the school is arguably worse than when it was first presented. I mean, we watch them fire someone and blame an individual for someone's suicide off of nothing, off of literally nothing. Quote, red-haired antagonist doesn't stand up at the end of the film and does what's right. He sits there. I don't know if he's in shame. I don't know if he thinks he's in the right, but he doesn't stand up. And Mr. Keating doesn't magically, I have my job back. No, he's fired for good. This film doesn't have a feel-good ending because, oh, he's killed himself, but the school's a better place now. Nothing's going to change, really. Realistically, think about it. This is a small spark that has happened in this classroom. The headmaster is not going to change. The boys who didn't stand up aren't going to change. It is up to those few boys who stood up on their desks and defied, which has constrained them to this life of conformity, and you cannot make your own decisions because you aren't your parents, you are not your teachers, you are not allowed to do what you want to do. These boys stand up and say no. Not only are they rejecting the school, they're rejecting meritocracy. And both the school and meritocracy are the problem. They're both separate entities, but this institution has been plagued by meritocracy and the ideology of meritocracy. So, in my opinion, our true antagonist beyond the institution, something that isn't really tangible or, touchable, is meritocracy. It is what has corrupted everything. On Google, meritocracy is defined as a political system in which economic goods and/or political power are vested in individual people on the basis of talent, effort, achievement, rather than wealth or social class. Advancement in such a system is based on performance and is measured through examination and is demonstrated through achievement. These students have achieved a lot. We see this as they have done it. These students have defied what has been constraining them, and if this were any other film, we would say this is meritocracy. Because they are the good ones. They're the ones who deserve this. They're the ones who are defying what is wrong. When we come to the realization that the meritocracy that these people are exemplifying, we find out they're actually challenging it. Because this school that represents what meritocracy is, this is where the people with the most academic achievement, the best merit, the people with the money, since they've earned this money because they have good merit, go. The school is meritocracy. The people who go here show that it exists. However, throughout this film, and as audiences, we are like, no, this is horrible. This institution is awful. This is corrupt. This is what happens when people in power are able to abuse it. And this is when we come to the harsh reality that this is corruption. This is insanity. The fact that these students are being forced to confess, are being forced to blame someone based off of nothing, it really gets you thinking, how can meritocracy exist when what meritocracy stands for, this beautiful system that we as America are defined by, because those who are worth it, those who work hard, are able to achieve this lifestyle. But we look into this lifestyle from these people who are privileged and had the opportunity to just have a free ticket into here, and they realize that this isn't right. This is corrupt, and we typically don't see this. It's always in these films. The middle class person, the person who is the hard worker, who achieves the American dream. What differs this film is that there is no American dream. There is no middle class person who has worked their way up into this place. All these boys are rich and powerful, and their parents are rich and powerful, and they place them into this institution. And what they do is unveil what has been conceived and hidden behind closed doors in its entirety. I'm standing my ground on the center of gravity, being this quote. We all have a need for acceptance, but remember, your beliefs are unique and your own. At timestamp 1 hour and 4 minutes and 45 seconds. It is so dangerous to go against what is expected of you. What everyone else is doing. That is why at the end of the film, everyone is not standing up. Even though Mr. Keating has had such a tremendous and dramatic effect on these people, hasn't extended to everyone. Quoting the original prompt for this paper, what does the film teach about meritocracy? It teaches that it is a corrupt ideology that has been planted inside our heads and takes a different approach to talking about meritocracy not through the lens of something that we're able to understand as middle-class individuals who work hard, who just don't happen to get that opportunity to go to these institutions. It is told through the lens of the privileged and the people who are destined for greatness, that once they finally open their eyes to what it is like, actually, that is when we as an audience, as middle class and lower class people who have no idea what this lifestyle is like, are able to actually see the facade of it all. That this isn't what you want to do, as much as it's awesome to go to an Ivy League school and to become a doctor and make a bunch of money. There is always going to be something or someone who you step over, something that you do that isn't right. That if you don't address the fact that you are privileged, that you are in a system that is built upon racism, upon classism, if you are not able to admit to that at all in the position that these boys are in, then you are a part of the problem. The film isn't here to give you a cut and paste of why meritocracy is bad and why it is bad to believe that meritocracy exists and that the American dream exists and that this is just the perspective of, blah, 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 blah. The film, cut and paste on the surface level, is about understanding your self-worth. And our self-worth is not basing and valuing everything we do on accomplishments that are defined by grades, by other people, by money, because once we do that, once we base success on if you go to Harvard, if you are a doctor, if you are a lawyer, if you make a six-figure salary, then this endless cycle of the American dream, of meritocracy, of the corruption of America, it'll never end. It will never end. And that's what this movie is trying to do, is to say and to show that this is a corrupt system in the most dramatic way possible. This isn't someone getting snubbed on a scholarship. Someone has killed themselves and they're not taking the blame for it. And they are refusing to take accountability for what they have done. Like I stated before, the film doesn't end with a very feel-good, happy ending that ties up all loose ends. Mr. Keating is gone. These boys are standing up in class, and unfortunately we can assume that after Mr. Keating left, that these boys got disciplined, maybe some of them got expelled, or they just had to continue on this track. As pessimistic as I am being, it is so crucial and important that that scene exists and show Mr. Keating that you are not at fault, that what you have done has only had a positive effect on us. I really don't know how to end this, to be quite honest with you, besides truly saying how much it is important to understand your self-worth. And like that center of gravity quote states, we are unique individuals with our own ideas, our own opinions, and our own way of experiencing and living life. It is important that to go through life without conforming to what someone else wants you to do. You are told that you are a unique person who needs to follow their own path. And as corny as that is, it's true. Tradition for a lot of my essays, I like ending off with a quote that really stuck with me. I don't want to use the center of gravity for this, so I actually found another one that really did stick with me that Mr. Keating said. We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are all noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life, but poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless train of the faithlessness, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?" Thank you very much.